Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really fascinating, a concept that might just change how you look at, well, pretty much everything. Risk, systems, how things survive and even thrive.
Yeah, we're talking about anti-fragility. It's this powerful idea, mostly from Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile.
Exactly. We've been digging into material based on that book, and our plan today is to unpack it for you. Give you the core insights, the mental models, basically a new way to think about uncertainty.
It really challenges a lot of standard thinking, doesn't it? The source material argues that, how we usually try to manage shocks and surprises is often, well, kind of wrong, sometimes even harmful.
Right. It's not just about bouncing back or being tough. It's about things, systems, even people that actually gain from chaos, from stress, from volatility.
So we'll be looking at the definition, what it isn't as well as what it is, comparing it to being fragile or just robust.
And where it shows up, spoiler, it's kind of everywhere in nature.
Yeah, and then contrasting that with how modern life sometimes makes things more fragile. Plus, the whole idea of skin in the game, accountability.
The limits of trying to predict those big, unexpected events.
Right, black swans. And finally, some practical ways to deal with all this uncertainty without relying on flawed predictions.
Okay, let's jump right in. Anti-fragility, the core idea. The author actually had to invent the word, which it's kind of telling, isn't it?
It really is. The material points out we have words for things that get hurt by stress. Fragile, like a teacup. Drop it, it shatters. Way more downside than upside from a sudden shock.
Definitely. And we also have words for things that just resist stress, that endure it and stay the same. Robust, resilient. Think of a big rock. You hit it, it's still pretty much a rock.
Exactly. It doesn't really change. But Taleb noticed, according to the text, there wasn't a good word for the opposite of fragile, something that doesn't just resist shocks, but actually likes them in a way, gets better.
So anti-fragile things benefit from shocks. Volatility, randomness, disorder, stress, all the stuff we usually try to avoid, they thrive on it.
That's the core. They grow, they get stronger, they improve when they're exposed to these things.
The examples in the source material really make this clear. Okay, so you've got the fragile glass, the robust stone, but then think about steel.
Right. The text mentions that if you hammer steel repeatedly, you're not breaking it like glass. You're actually
hardening it, making it stronger. It benefits from that stressor.
Precisely. Or maybe an even better example from the text, something more alive, is the human body.
Ah, yes. The exercise example.
Right. If you take away all stress, like if you just lie in bed for a month, what happens?
Your muscles waste away, you get weaker. The lack of stress is actually bad for you.
Exactly. But introduce stress. Lift weights, go for a run, challenge your body deliberately, and it doesn't just cope. It adapts, it gets stronger, builds muscle, improves. It benefits from the stress.
That difference, that asymmetry, is really the heart of it, isn't it? Fragile things have that skewed downside, a small bump, can cause a huge problem.
While anti-fragile things have a skewed upside, they stand to gain more than they lose from random events, from volatility.
The source uses that simple finance example. If you could lose, say, 100 rupees, but you might gain, well, potentially an unlimited amount, that's anti-fragile.
The upside is open-ended. The downside is capped. Any unexpected good thing really helps you. Bad things only hurt you a limited amount. The opposite, limited gain, unlimited loss, that's super fragile.
And it's wild to think, like you said, that we didn't really have a common word for this positive response to randomness. It suggests maybe we've been missing something important in how we think about the world.
Could be a blind spot, yeah. Focusing only on protecting things or making them tough, but not actively designing for things that gain from disorder. The language shapes the thought.
And the text mentions this isn't just about one specific field, right? This idea of domain dependence.
Yes, exactly. Fragility, robustness, anti-fragility. These aren't just labels for, say, materials or biological systems. They apply across the board. Economics, ideas, social systems, technology, you name it.
Okay, so if it's this fundamental property,
yeah,
where do we actually see it in action?
Well, the source material argues it's not some rare, exotic thing. It's everywhere. Especially in systems that are complex, that are alive, that have lasted a long time. It's kind of the secret sauce for survival and growth.
Like evolution.
Evolution is the textbook example, really. You have random mutations, errors, volatility. You have environmental pressures, stressors. What happens?
The individuals or species that happen to be better suited, maybe even benefit from those changes, they survive, reproduce. The others don't.
Right, so the system of life itself gets stronger, more adapted over time because of all that randomness and pressure, not in spite of it. It learns from errors, essentially.
And the source lists so many other examples. Culture adapting, ideas getting sharper through debate, revolutions shaking things up. Then maybe those are fragile during the process.
True, transitions can be fragile, but the potential for renewal is there. Decentralized political systems that allow for local experiments and failures might be more anti-fragile than rigid top-down ones.
Hmm.
Technological innovation too often comes from messy trial and error, not some perfect blueprint.
Yeah, the text mentions corporate survival companies learning from shocks, even things like good recipes evolving over time, cities growing through interaction, legal systems adapting.
Bacterial resistance is a stark one, isn't it? The bacteria get stronger because we hit them with antibiotics. Our own existence as a species, having navigated ice ages and plagues and everything else, that's anti-fragility on a grand scale.
So there's this split. Things that are just physical objects tend to be fragile or robust. Your stapler doesn't improve if you keep dropping it.
Right, but living systems, complex systems, often have this built-in ability to gain from disorder. Your body, ecosystems, markets, when they're allowed to function naturally anyway.
And the source says nature is the ultimate master of this, handling rare events, black swans.
Yeah, nature's been doing it for billions of years. Constant destruction, replacement, selection, reshuffling. It doesn't try to eliminate randomness, it uses it. It's built on it.
Which connects to that idea you mentioned. Anti-fragility involves a kind of love for errors. That sounds weird.
It does sound counterintuitive, but the point is that certain kinds of errors, especially small ones, are actually valuable information. They're feedback.
Okay, how so?
In a fragile system, an error is just damage. Full stop. In a robust system, you try to prevent errors or fix them quickly to get back to the status quo. But in an anti-fragile system, errors, especially small, contained ones, tell the system what doesn't work. They force adaptation. Evolution learns from mutations that fail. A business tries a small pilot, it fails, they learn not to scale it up. That failure prevents a much bigger, catastrophic failure.
So these errors provide the stress or the information needed to get stronger or smarter.
Exactly. That capacity to benefit from mistakes is key.
Okay, so nature, complex systems, they seem to have this figured out. But then the source makes this sharp turn, asking, what happens when we, in our modern world, try to smooth everything out, eliminate all the bumps, the randomness, the stress?
This is really the crux of the critique of modernity in the text. The argument is that when you deprive complex systems, especially living ones, of the volatility they need, you don't make them safer in the long run. You actually make them weaker, more fragile. You set them up for a bigger fall later on.
Like the boxer kept in cotton wool. They avoid minor scrapes but get destroyed in a real match.
That's a good analogy. The text argues that a lot of our modern structured world top-down policies, systems designed for maximum stability, might be unintentionally fragilizing us.
How? Where does this happen?
Well, the source gives examples across different areas. The economy, for instance. Bailouts. Stopping businesses from failing might seem kind in the short term.
But it keeps inefficient, fragile companies alive, right? It prevents the system from clearing out the weak links and letting stronger ones emerge.
Precisely. The source uses that blunt phrase, let them fail. It sounds harsh, but the idea is that allowing smaller failures is necessary for the health and anti-fragility of the overall system. It prevents a buildup of hidden risks.
Health is another big one mentioned.
Yeah, the idea that maybe our constant access to food, never experiencing occasional scarcity, combined with sitting around all day removing physical stress, maybe that contributes to things like diabetes, metabolic syndrome.
Like the air conditioning analogy in the text, always being at a perfect temperature means our body might lose some ability to adapt to heat or cold.
Exactly. Or overprotective parenting, shielding kids from every little bump and disappointment, might prevent them from developing their own resilience, their own anti-fragility.
So removing these natural stressors in areas where systems are meant to adapt actually makes them brittle.
That's the claim. It applies to politics, education, too, according to the source. Systems can become fragile if they suppress dissent, variation, challenge too much. They stop learning.
It feels so backwards compared to how we normally think about safety and planning.
It absolutely is. And it connects directly to another really important concept from the source, iatrogenics.
Iatrogenics, harm caused by the healer.
Exactly. Damage that comes from the treatment or the intervention itself. Especially when experts are involved, doctors, policymakers, planners, you name it. The text uses the example of treating a tiny pimple with some powerful drug that then causes a massive allergic reaction all over.
So the attempt to fix a small problem creates a much bigger one.
Right, the intervention causes more harm than the original issue, or more harm than doing nothing would have caused.
And this applies more broadly than just medicine, like trying to overstabilize systems.
Absolutely. Trying to eliminate all the noise, all the small fluctuations in a complex system, what the source calls pseudo-stabilization, can prevent the system from making necessary small adjustments. It can mask underlying problems until they become huge. Or the intervention itself can introduce new, unforeseen problems.
The source mentioned this relating to things like foreign policy interventions, where trying to impose stability might actually backfire.
Yes, that's a classic example discussed. The idea is that you're messing with a complex system you don't fully understand, and your attempts to fix it based on a simplified model can have disastrous nonlinear consequences. You might prevent the system from finding its own, possibly messy, but ultimately more stable path.
It's like treating an ecosystem like a garden. You can just weed and rearrange at will, ignoring all the hidden connections.
That's a great way to put it. And this tendency to intervene, often based on theory rather than deep practical understanding, is personified in the book by this figure, the fragilista.
Ah, the fragilista. Tell us about this character.
The fragilista is basically the archetype of someone who makes things fragile through naive intervention. Often the source paints this picture of someone in a suit working at a desk, maybe disconnected from the real-world consequences of their decisions. They rely heavily on models and theories.
And crucially, they tend to mistake what they don't know for something that doesn't exist. If it's not in their model, it's impossible.
Exactly. Which makes their plans incredibly vulnerable to anything outside those models, like black swans. They build fragile systems because they ignore the unknown unknowns. And often, they don't personally suffer when their predictions or plans go wrong.
The source breaks down different types, doesn't it?
It does. There's the medical sigilista, over-treating, denying the body's ability to heal. The economic planner, treating the economy like a washing machine to be constantly fine-tuned. The psychiatric fragilista, maybe over-medicating normal ranges of emotion, especially in kids. The overprotective soccer mom, shielding from all harm. The financial fragilista, using risk models that blow up spectacularly. The military fragilista, intervening in complex geopolitical systems with unforeseen blowback. And the predictor fragilista, encouraging others to take risks based on flimsy forecasts.
It's pretty scathing critique of a certain kind of expertise, isn't it? Especially expertise that lacks accountability.
Very much so. The source argues that political discussion often gets stuck aiming for just resilience, like just trying to withstand shocks, instead of seeking true anti-fragility, which would mean finding ways to use shocks and disorder to grow stronger.
And a big reason these fragilistas can cause so much damage, according to the text, comes down to that lack of skin in the game.
Yes, this is absolutely central. Skin in the game simply means you have personal exposure to the downside of your decisions. If you recommend a risky strategy, you stand to lose something significant yourself if it fails money, reputation, maybe even physical safety in some contexts.
And the problem, the agency problem the text describes, is when that link is broken. When someone else makes the decisions, but other people bear the consequences.
Exactly. That allows for a transfer of fragility. Someone can set things up so they benefit from volatility, they become anti-fragile, but they do it at the expense of others who are left vulnerable, bearing the potential losses.
The source uses some pretty stark examples here, contrasting historical heroes with what it calls modern inverse heroes.
Right. Historically, maybe leaders gained respect by taking personal risks alongside their people. But the inverse hero, the bureaucrat, the banker, the consultant, the academic theorist might gain rewards and status while being completely insulated from the negative outcomes of their advice or decisions.
Like the military leader example. They might gain politically from a war,
While the soldiers and civilians bear the ultimate cost. The text explicitly mentions this kind of asymmetry in the context of historical conflicts, including referencing the India-Pakistan situation as an illustration where decision-makers' gains can be detached from the devastating losses suffered by those directly impacted. One side gets the upside, the other gets the catastrophic downside.
So these modern inverse heroes can game the system. They get the bonus when things go right, but the taxpayer or the customer or the employee pays the price when things inevitably go wrong because the system was fragile.
That's the core critique. It leads to this ethical rule the source proposes. Thou shalt not have anti-fragility at the expense of the fragility of others. Basically, if you cause damage, you should feel the pain, Responsibility and consequences should align.
It's like the prediction example, the astrologer or market pundit. They boast when they're right.
But face no penalty when they're wrong. A fair system, the text suggests, would mean if their prediction fails, they pay, maybe refund double the fee. That's skin in the game. Without it, they're anti-fragile to being wrong, while the people who trusted them might be ruined.
And modern complexity makes this easier to hide. All the layers of bureaucracy, complex finance.
It definitely can obscure who bears the risk. The 2008 crisis is presented as a prime example. Risk was sliced, diced, hidden, and transferred until the whole system imploded, and the public picked up the tab while many architects of the fragile system walked away relatively unscathed.
It seems like a fundamental breakdown of accountability.
And this lack of skin in the game, this ability to avoid consequences, is tied directly to how badly we often handle uncertainty and those really big, unexpected shocks, the black swans.
Right, the black swan. Let's unpack that. What exactly is it, according to the source?
A black swan event has three main characteristics. One, it's an outlier. It lies outside the realm of regular expectations, nothing in the past pointing to its possibility. Two, it carries an extreme impact. And three, despite being an outlier, human nature makes us concoct explanations after the fact, making it seem explainable and predictable in hindsight.
Like the Ahmedabad airport accident example in
Yeah.
Ontario. For that specific context, perhaps that type of failure on that specific plane was completely unforeseen.
Exactly. Unpredictable beforehand, massive consequences, and afterwards, everyone analyzes why it must have happened. It fits the bill.
And that leads to the illusion of predictability.
Yes. Because we can explain it, looking backward, we trick ourselves into thinking we could have seen it coming. We create neat stories out of messy reality, connecting the dots in hindsight, and totally underestimating the role of pure, random chance and the truly unknowable. This makes us overconfident.
The turkey problem illustrates this perfectly.
Oh yeah, the poor turkey. It's fed every day for 1,000 days by the farmer. From the turkey's perspective, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests the farmer is benevolent and life is good and predictable. Its statistical confidence that tomorrow will bring more food grows each day.
Until Thanksgiving.
Exactly. A massive, devastating event that was completely unpredictable from the turkey's data set, but perfectly predictable from the farmer's perspective. It shows the danger of extrapolating from past data in systems where rare, high-impact events are possible, but haven't happened yet in your observed history.
And the source really hammers home a key point here. The odds of these rare events, these black swans, are fundamentally uncomputable.
Right. We can calculate odds pretty well in closed systems like casinos, but in the real complex world, we know far, far less about the probability of a 1 in 1,000 year event than a 1 in 5 year event. Our models just break down when dealing with those extreme tails of the probability distribution. The idea that we can precisely measure risk for these kinds of events using standard statistical tools is, according to the source, a dangerous delusion promoted by flawed risk experts.
Okay, so if we can't reliably predict or measure the risk of these big, damaging events, what can we do? This sounds kind of hopeless.
Not hopeless. This is where the really practical insight comes in. The source argues that while measuring risk, future uncertain probability, is often impossible, measuring fragility, a current observable property, is actually feasible.
So we might not know when the earthquake will hit, but we can tell which building is more likely to collapse if it does hit.
Exactly. We can assess comparative fragility much more reliably than we can predict the event itself. The source gives great examples. You know your grandmother is more fragile to a cold snap than you are. You can assess pretty reliably that a brittle dictatorship is more fragile to political shocks than a stable, decentralized country like Switzerland.
Where, as the text jokes, nobody even knows who the president is because the system isn't fragilely dependent on one person.
Right. Or you can look at two banks and see which one is more leveraged, more interconnected, and therefore more fragile to a financial crisis. Or compare a flimsy modern building to a centuries-old cathedral. You have a pretty good idea which is more fragile to an earthquake.
So we can identify vulnerability even if we can't predict the trigger.
Precisely. And that shifts the whole strategy. Forget trying to predict the unpredictable black swan. Instead, focus on detecting and reducing fragility. Build systems that are robust to common shocks and, ideally, anti-fragile to unexpected ones.
Makes sense. Strengthen the system rather than trying to guess the specific threat.
And the text adds that modern complex systems with all their tight connections and feedback loops are actually more prone to cascades and runaway reactions. So, ironically, more complexity can mean less predictability, making the focus on reducing fragility even more important.
Okay, so prediction is out. Naive intervention can be harmful.
Huh?
What are the practical, non-predictive ways forward that the source suggests? How do we actually navigate this?
Right, this is the what to do part. A major strategy is via negativa, the negative way.
Uh,
Subtraction,
Yeah.
meaning you improve things, gain knowledge, or reach a goal often more effectively by removing the bad stuff rather than adding more stuff. Understand something by what it isn't.
So like improve your health by stopping smoking or cutting out junk food, rather than just adding supplements. Improve your finances by cutting out stupid expenses or avoiding debt, rather than just chasing risky investments.
Exactly. Medicine by subtraction, the source calls it. Removing a known harm is often safer, more robust, and has fewer unintended consequences than adding a new intervention, especially in complex systems. Think about clear writing. You often improve it by removing unnecessary words. It's about elegance through subtraction.
Contrasting with the fragilista who always wants to add a new rule, a new drug, a new program.
Precisely. Via Negativa emphasizes the wisdom in knowing what not to do, what to remove.
Okay, what else?
Tinkering and trial and error. This is presented as a fundamentally anti-fragile way to discover, innovate, and make progress.
How is it anti-fragile?
Because it uses errors. You try something, usually on a small scale. If it fails, okay, you've learned something valuable with limited damage. The error provides information. If it succeeds, you build on it, scale it up. It's iterative. It learns from interaction with reality. It thrives on variation and feedback.
So it's the opposite, trying to design the perfect thing from the top down, based purely on theory.
Exactly. And this leads to the source's critique of what it calls the Soviet Harvard illusion, or the funny image of lecturing birds how to fly.
Okay, what's that illusion?
It's the mistaken belief that most important innovations and progress come neatly from universities, formal research, government plans, big R&D labs. The educated, theoretical, top-down approach.
When in reality,
In reality, the source argues a huge amount of technological and practical progress comes from tinkerers, entrepreneurs, craftsmen, people doing things, trying things, failing, adjusting, taking risks, often without a perfect theoretical understanding. They learn by doing, by getting feedback from the real world.
so the academics might write the history or explain the theory after the invention works, but they didn't necessarily create it. Like teaching business principles to Gujaratis, the source implies, they already know business from generations of practice, not from textbook.
Exactly. It's a critique of mistaking the narrative for the cause and of undervaluing practical, hands-on trial and error knowledge compared to theoretical knowledge. The intelligence of anti-fragility lets us do things effectively even without fully understanding why they work. Sometimes doing is smarter than thinking, especially in complex situations.
And this ties into optionality.
Yes, optionality is key. Having options choices where the potential upside is large and the downside is small or capped is inherently anti-fragile. You don't need to predict which option will pay off, you just need to have several low-cost options available.
Like investing small amounts in many different startups. Most might fail, small loss per option, but one might become huge, big gain.
Precisely. Or having multiple skills, multiple potential projects. It lets you benefit from randomness and uncertainty hitting the upside without needing to know exactly where it will hit. You can afford not to know what's going on in detail as long as you're positioned to benefit from positive surprises.
So small bets, trial and error, removing the bad stuff. It seems like simplicity is a recurring theme here.
Very much so. The source argues that in complex, uncertain environments, simple, robust rules and strategies often outperform complex, optimized, but brittle ones. Avoid catastrophe, embrace small errors, keep options open, remove known harms. That's more sophisticated than trying to build a perfect predictive model that's guaranteed to fail eventually.
It pushes back against that naive rationalist tendency to think we can understand and control everything through abstract reason alone.
Right. It acknowledges the limits of our knowledge and the messy, unpredictable, Dionysian nature of reality, suggesting we should work with that uncertainty rather than pretending we can eliminate it through neat Aristotelian plans.
Wow. Okay, that really is a different way of looking at things. It shifts the focus entirely.
It really does. Away from prediction and control towards adaptation, robustness, and seeking ways to actually gain from the inevitable messiness of the world.
All right, let's try to quickly recap the main points we've hit in this deep dive. We started with anti-fragility itself, this idea of gaining from shocks, disorder, stress.
contrasting it sharply with fragility, breaks under stress, and robustness, just resists stress, stays the same.
We saw it's everywhere in nature evolution. Living bodies, systems that learn from errors and stressors.
And then the critique. How modern attempts to eliminate all volatility can backfire, creating fragility through naive intervention, often worsened by a lack of skin in the game for decision makers.
Which brought up that ethical point. Don't get anti-fragile at someone else's expense. Risk and consequences should be linked.
We talked about black swans, those unpredictable, high-impact events, and how trying to predict them is often futile because their probability is uncomputable.
We can often assess fragility. We can see what's vulnerable, even if we don't know when the shock will come. That's the more actionable insight.
Right. Focus on reducing fragility and building anti-fragility rather than on prediction.
And the ways to do that, without prediction, via negativa, subtracting the harmful. Tinkering and trial and error, learning from small mistakes. And optionality, creating choices with big potential upsides and small downsides.
These give you a framework, a mental toolkit for navigating a complex world. It helps you look at systems, decisions, your own life, and ask, is this fragile? How could it be more robust or even anti-fragile? Where are the hidden vulnerabilities and where are the opportunities to benefit from randomness?
It's a way to stay informed and make better choices under uncertainty, respecting that we can't know everything instead of pretending we can. It's about structuring things so that surprises, when they come, are more likely to help than hurt.
And maybe thinking about this, about the inherent unpredictability discussed in the source material. Maybe even reflecting on the ultimate black swan for every individual, the fact that mortality is certain but its timing is unknowable. Does embracing this framework of anti-fragility and robustness change how we should approach the present? How we build resilience in the things we can control, knowing we can't control the ultimate timing? Does it shift our focus?
That is definitely something to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.